Good afternoon. My name is Vicky Songyan Kwan, Associate Curator of Korean Art and Culture at ROM. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the ROM sits on the ancestral land of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Anishinaabe Nation, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, since time immemorial to today. I'm delighted you could join us for today's program, which complements Rome's current exhibition, Death, Life's Greatest Mystery. This exhibition was organized by the Field Museum and made possible by Lilly Endowment Inc. This exhibition is generously supported by the Royal Exhibition Circle. Death, Life's Greatest Mystery runs until April 7, 2024. Today's program will feature three of my colleagues, Drs. Dipali Duman, Wen-Chan Chung, and Akiko Takesue, as they share works of art from their collections. Dipali is the Dan Mishra Senior Curator of Global South Asia. Wen-Chan is the Louis Hollystone Chair of East Asian Art. Akiko is the Bishop White Committee Associate Curator of Japanese Art and Culture. Each speaker will present the Datta Buddha subject in the art of their respective areas in 10 minutes. And we will open up the floor for discussions and Q&A with the audience. I encourage everyone to submit your questions and thoughts via the Q&A feature during the program, and we will do our best to address them during the program. Okay, let's begin our journey with Dipali, who will introduce the emergence of Buddhism and the Datta Buddha subject in South Asian art. Dipali.
Thank you, Vicky, and hello, everybody. I am going to give some context for Buddhism and talk a little bit about where art and representations in Buddhist art originated. So Buddhism originated in North India. The Buddha was a historical figure named Gautam Siddharth. He lived around 500 BC or BCE, and he was born a prince to the Shakya clan in what is today present-day Nepal. And depictions of him actually didn't come about until about 800 years after his lifetime. And you're looking at one of those examples. So this one dates to the 3rd century AD or CE. And it basically shows a young man wearing the robes of a monk. Next one. So the Buddha is considered a great teacher. And locations during his lifetime where significant events took place became very important and developed as pilgrimage centers. So, for example, if you're looking at this map, the place of Lumbini was where the Buddha was born. Bodh Gaya was the place the Buddha attained enlightenment. Sarnath is the site where the Buddha preached his first sermon. And Kushinagar is this place of the Buddha's passing. Next slide. So these kind of significant moments in his life became depicted in Buddhist art. And here are some examples. So on the left, you're seeing an image of the Buddha's birth. So in the center, you see a female figure. That's his mother, Queen Maya, and she's often depicted, at least in South Asian art, standing with her legs crossed, holding the branches of a tree that's above her, following prototypes of nature divinities. And if you look closely, you can see a little baby coming out of her side. So that's the Buddha. And on the right, you see there are many depictions of the seated Buddha. This particular one is specific because you can see one of his hands is reaching down and touching the earth, calling the earth goddess to witness the moment of his enlightenment. And so this image often represents the Buddha's enlightenment. Next slide. So this is what the death of the Buddha came to look like in Buddhist art. Essentially, you're looking at a figure in a robe that's lying on a bed, and surrounding, you see sort of grief-stricken devotees, so mourners. And in Buddhism, death was not necessarily the end of things, but was, or a sad event, but was in fact, in the Buddha's case, considered the final release from the cycle of rebirths or nirvana. Buddhism teaches that life is suffering and that through detachment and following the middle path, one can attain a release from this suffering and the cycle of rebirths. And in many ways, the images of the Buddha's death were used as symbols for Buddhist teachings. Next slide. These are just other examples of images of the Buddha's death in other museum collections. And you can see how remarkably consistent the iconography became even through the centuries. And I'll just point out here, you can see all the grief-stricken mourners around him, except for one figure seated in front of the bed, very calmly looking on. And that's the devotee that knows what's going on, that this isn't a sad event, but actually the Buddha attaining nirvana. Next slide. I couldn't help but include this wonderfully rich panel of the Buddha's death from the Indian Museum in Kolkata. Next slide. So the ROM's relief showing the Buddha's death is actually part of a architectural structure, and it fits with 3 other panels in our collection, and you can see kind of them all fitted together here. Next slide. And this particular architectural form is called a harmika, and it fits on top of what is called a stupa, or a burial mound, that came to represent the body of the Buddha and thus became a focus of worship in Buddhism. And here you can see it among many other structures in a Buddhist monastery. In many ways, monasteries were places of learning for Buddhist ideology, and they were often set up along trade routes. Next one. So it was mostly traders and missionaries that led to the spread of Buddhism northward, and my colleagues will talk about more about that, but also southward and eastward. Next slide. So one of the places that Buddhism spread is Sri Lanka. And here you're looking at a monumental sculpture of the death of the Buddha at a site called Palanarua. And it was created out of a piece of rock. So it was actually carved and cut out of a standing piece of rock. Sri Lanka is today one of the few South Asian countries that has a significant Buddhist population. Next slide. I think we skipped one. Yes, thank you. So another place that Buddhism spread is eastward to what was called Burma, or today called Myanmar. And you're looking here at a lovely little plaque that was made out of clay, showing different figures of the Buddha. And these kind of small clay plaques were the kind of portable objects that pilgrims would carry with them from place to place. And it was one of the ways ideologies of Buddhism spread. And in the center of this plaque, you can see a seated image of the Buddha, his hand reaching down. That's an image of his enlightenment. But also, if you look right up at the top, tucked in the corner, is an image of the Buddha's death. And you can see him lying on the bed. Okay. Next slide. And then just to show you that the iconography continues even to this present day in, for example, popular prints that circulate around India on your left, for example, as well as other more modern sculptural architectural shrines, such as this one on your right in Sri Lanka, nearby a very ancient city called Anuradhapura. And just to say that the death of the Buddha or the Buddha's nirvana was not just commemorating these images, or not just commemorating a life event of an important religious figure, but really is meant to be taken as a guide for all devotees and a symbol of each person's potential to attain release from the cycle of suffering or rebirth. And I will now pass it on to my colleague.
Thank you, Dipali. I really appreciate how you showed us such ample examples of sculptures and architecture in such a short time. Thank you very much. Let's move to China. Wenchen, could you introduce the Data Buddha motif in Chinese art?
Sure. But that's first go back to this map. I want to first thank you, Vicky, and hi everybody. I want to first quickly mention that Buddhists believe actually traveled from India first to Central Asia and then into China, mainly through this trail of the Silk Road. As you can see on the map on lower right, there's a more detailed this map of the Silk Road. Was divided into south and north, and then converted at the Dunhuang, which is called the gateway of the Silk Road to China. So Buddhism first arrived in China in the Han Dynasty, which is almost like 2,000 years ago. And legend says Emperor Ming of the Eastern Han had this interesting dream about a golden deity floating in the air about his palace. And one of his ministers told him about a Buddha and a holy man from the West who resembled this figure in his dream. So the emperor sent the people to India to investigate, and they brought back the scriptures and a statue of the Buddha. And then missionaries with activities soon followed, and then more sutra were translated into the Chinese text, and the images of Buddha also were acquired. And the Chinese, of course, start to make their own images. Next slide. So here I'm showing you a couple examples of the representation of the death in Chinese culture. But I want to mention that compared to the early representation of the what we see in the South Asia, the representation of the nirvana in Chinese, which is called the 涅槃相, shows greater sort of diversity in terms of material format. You can see on the left side, these are the stone carving reliefs. The lower left actually is a very interesting sort of side panel of sort of a sarcophagus. And on the right side, you see this colossal Buddha. I want to mention this dated much earlier than the one the Pali shows. It's from the sort of a medieval China. And also mirror paintings. And these two images on the right are both from the very famous temple caves at Mogao, Dunhuang. That's the gateway, remember, to China. So in terms of the representation, you probably noticed that's quite similar to what we have seen in the South Asia examples. The Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha, is shown kind of reclining and surrounded by a lot of mourners. But I do want to mention a very particular sort of emerging things in China, which I call it a sort of medieval sort of Chinese contribution to the nirvana iconography. Next slide. So this is a very interesting images from a larger sequence of painted murals, again, in one of the Dunhuang's Mogao caves in Dunhuang, dated to around 7th centuries. So in addition to the common theme of the reclining Shakyamuni, you often see, which is also depicted in this mural, I didn't show it, but this particular thing represented the Shakyamuni Buddha actually rising above a golden coffin. The figure on the left side is sitting above the coffin, and he's giving a lecture to his mother, Queen Maya, who is sitting in front of the coffin. So this scene image not just on this sort of illustrated Shakyamuni's super sort of human power, be able to transcend the boundaries between the life and death. But more importantly, it emphasized the Shakyamuni's filial duty toward his mother. So the story goes that his mother, Queen Maya, heard the death of the Buddha, and she rushed from heaven to see him, but he didn't get the last chance to see her son. So she was very sorrow. So by reappearing and giving a lecture to her, the Buddha sort of comfort his mother. So this added episode is very important to the Chinese believers, as the concept of the filial piety is most important in the Chinese society. Next slide. So here I want to mention particularly the scroll painting format, which is uniquely Chinese in terms of representing the death of the Buddha. These paintings were actually either on paper or silk. They are portable items, so they can be easily transferred. Particularly, they were taken to Korea and Japan with the threat of the Buddhism to these countries. This will be discussed by Vicky and Akiko later. But I just want to quickly mention that both paintings are Chinese. One was done much earlier in the 13th century, and the others dated to 17th century. They're all very elaborate with a lot of things going on. But the Buddhas always show as the most prominent figure as the focal point in these paintings. I won't go to detail discuss them, but I just want to mention, even they are Chinese painting, they went to Japan, and now they are all collected in Japan. And this type of representation is very popular in Japan, and this will be discussed by my colleague Akiko later. Next slide. So in ROM collection, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of representation of the death of Buddha's death in the Chinese collection. But we do have a small sculpture right now, currently is on display in our gallery. Here is the case I'm showing you. Yes, that's the on the corner, right corner, that's the statue. I want to mention that this we display the statues in the context of telling Shakyamuni's the major events in his life. So all the objects displayed here originally are not related, not from the same site, but they were put together to tell the story of the major events in historical Buddha's life. So it started from the left to the right. You can see the relief there depicting the birth of the Buddha, and also this statue here showing the infant Buddha of his famous episode of the walking 7 steps after his birth. And then moving on to the middle part, there are several cast bronzes representing the Buddha's meditations in different stage. And finally, the death of the Buddha. So let's zoom in to take a quick look at this statue. So it's a small statue. It's an earthenware dated to 14th to 15th century. Unfortunately, we don't have the provenance of where they came from. So you probably notice immediately the Buddha is not surrounded by any mourners like we see previously. We don't know whether they were lost or originally they were there or not, since we have no information where this statue came from. But looking closely, you might notice that the Buddha's body is covered by gold pigments, suggesting his divine sort of a status. And he's on his very calm kind of a posture with his right arm supporting his head, looking very, very peaceful on his final state on Earth. So this is all from me. I'll pass this back to Vicky.
Thank you very much, Wenchen. I really like the painting of Buddha rising from his coffin to give a talk to his mother, Queen Maya. Okay, let's move our journey to Korea. I'm going to show you two Korean objects linking the death of Buddha subject to travel. Since Buddhism was introduced in Korea in the 4th century, Korean Buddhist monks traveled to China and South Asian regions to bring Buddhist sutras and Buddha's relics called sari. What flourished in Korea, therefore, was not only stupas and sarira, the containers that house sari, as well as a travel literature illustrating a Buddhist monk's adventurous journey to the West. West here means China and India. In Korean art, the death of Buddha motif appears in only a few examples remaining today. One example is this painting, 쌍림 열반도, the painting of the death of Buddha under two trees, which is known to be created in the late 16th century Joseon dynasty. In this hand-scroll painting, which you're supposed to see from the right to the left, the painting starts with the scene of Buddha's death under the double trees, and it ends with the quite unique scene. Let's zoom in this painting. So here's the part. People are picking up the sari, the relics from Buddha's body after cremation, splitting and packaging them, and carrying them in their bags. This painting reflects the Korean imagination of the death of Buddha, as well as their curiosity behind Buddha's sari that travel all the way to Korea. I brought this image to introduce ROM's only Korean collection related to the death of Buddha subject. We have a gilt bronze casket for sarira, which was probably created around the 18th century to the 10th century by the end of unified Silla or the early Goryeo period. This sarira is on view in the Gallery of Korea as an index of the travels of people and Buddha's reliquary that moved across Asia after the death of Buddha. Okay, this is for me. I'm a moderator, so I keep it short. Let's continue our journey to Japan. We have an exciting new acquisition of Japanese art. Akiko, could you show us the collection?
Sure. Thank you, Vicky, and hi everyone. This is my name is Akiko, curator of Japanese art here at the ROM. The journey of Buddhism finally arrived in Japan. So Buddhism was introduced to Japan from China through Korea in the 6th century. And the image of the death of the historical Buddha like this has been particularly popular, as Wenchen mentioned, and perhaps because the image is emotionally engaging and the idea of entering nirvana is the ultimate goal for the religious of Buddhism. And in Japan, the painting format is more widely prevailed rather than sculpture. And very recently, we received a donation of this huge painting of death of Buddha. As you can see, it's quite impressive and very large. The whole painting measures 3 meters high and 1.6 meters wide. And this was a gift from Mr. Nicolas Pascucci in last year. So the condition of the painting may look modest. As you can see, it's on the paper, and then upper left corner is kind of slightly damaged. But that means how often this painting was used. So I'm talking about it slightly later in this talk. So let's look at the painting. As in the earlier examples that my colleague showed, the iconography is quite consistent. The historical Buddha lies down with his right arm under his head, and his body is painted in gold, showing his high status. And around him are humans, deities, and animals who gather to mourn and honor him. And in this particular painting, as many as 90 figures and 60 creatures are depicted. Next slide, please. The passing of the Buddha is said to have taken place on a full moon night near the Hiranyavati River in Kushinagar, India. Here you can see the waves of river behind the trees. And these trees are called sal trees, and the 4 of the 8 trees said to have turned white at the passing of Buddha because they were sad. Next slide, please. And descending from heaven is Shaka's mother, Queen Maya, accompanied by 5 attendants and a monk. Next slide, please. This is the detail. So Queen Maya is quite sad, weeping. Next slide, please. The 90 figures include bodhisattvas, Hindu deities or guardians, the Buddha's disciples and monks with shaven heads, and ordinary people from different backgrounds. Next slide. And animals and creatures of mythical and real, and even insects came to see Buddha at his passing.
But
And
no
as
cat?
you can, sorry?
No cat?
Oh, interestingly, yes, many paintings don't include cats for different reasons that were added later days. We don't know exactly why cats are not depicted in this type of painting. And in this Rose painting too, cat is not there. Okay. So as you can see, many people and animals are with expression of sorrows and grief. But the extent of grief depends on their own level of enlightenment. Next slide, please. So bodhisattvas whose bodies are also gold, you can see, they are here and there. They show a solemn serenity rather than explicit grief because they have achieved the spiritual enlightenment of Buddhahood. The Hindu deities and guardians, some of them with red and blue bodies around, on the far right, and they have been converted to the Buddha's teaching, and they are crying bitterly. So do monks and disciples. Next slide, please. On your left, you can see one of the monks even fainted from grief. And ordinary people are also in deep sorrow. So are the animals, as you can see on your right. This indicates that their incomplete understanding of the Buddhist ideal, which is, entering nirvana, is the release from the suffering from the earthly life. But then they think that death is very sad. Okay, next slide. Historically, this type of painting became very popular, at least from the 11th century in Japan. And many original paintings were created in the 12th to 14th century. And after that, earlier paintings were copied, and both as paintings or prints in large and small formats. And ROM's painting is a good example of such copies, but we don't know what is the original painting. But what we know is that this painting was most likely created in the mid to late 18th century because it has an inscription. Next slide, please. This is the inscription on the back of the painting. It says the repair of this painting was done in 1848. And this type of painting was normally repaired every 60 to 70 years. So we can say that it was originally made around 1770s. Next slide, please. And thanks to the wide circulation of this type of painting, almost every Buddhist temple in Japan at least has one painting of death of Buddha. The painting is hung at the annual memorial service to commemorate Buddha's death on February 15th in the lunar calendar, as you can see in these photos. And this service takes place across different sects, even today. And that means the wide popularity of this topic in Japanese Buddhism. And the style and modest quality of our painting, as I showed you before, is a good example that shows it was created for the purpose of wide circulation rather than the aesthetic or artistic value. And that the deep worship towards Shakyamuni, or historical Buddha in Japanese Buddhism, and how Buddhist temples have engaged with common followers. As you can see on the right photo, even children are learning about the story behind this painting. So that's all from me.
Thank you very much, Akiko. I think this Nehanju is more meaningful today in a way how Buddhism incorporates non-human beings as empathetic beings, although they were crying because they didn't know the meaning of nirvana. This was very interesting. So we went through how the motifs of the death of Buddha emerged in Buddhist art and culture from South Asia, and how it moved and similarly and differently developed in the art and culture of China, Korea, and Japan, respectively. Everyone in the audience, please leave questions in the chat feature. And all the speakers, please, Akiko, Dipali, and Wenchen, please turn on your camera. While we're waiting for a few more questions, let me ask a question to the three speakers. So we have talked about the death of Buddha. Then what about the death of humans in Buddhist cosmology? Dipali, Wenchen, Akiko, do you have any artistic subject or genre in your area that illustrates death of human and the aftermath of the death in Buddhist cosmology? Wenchen, maybe first.
Yeah, Vicky, can you show next slide? Yeah, I think so. We actually have a painting that is on display in the death exhibit. So I will just jump in to talk about it. So this is a representation of the Chinese house, currently also on display, which depicts the judgment and punishment in the 5th and 6th courts of the hell. So how does that relate to the human's death? There are 10 of this kind of house. So this one actually depicts only 2. So it's part of the set of 5. We only have this one. So supposedly the soul of the death would go to meet 10 judges or kings of this house. As you can see here, we have shown 2. The 5th one is called Yanluo Wang, very famous one in Chinese, the 10th house. So the soul of the death would meet them, and then their action in life would be held accountable and then be judged, receive the final judgments from these kings, and that will determine where they will be reincarnated in their next lives. So the death doesn't mean your life ends there, but you will be reborn. That's the idea here. So the principal concept behind this Chinese house is based on the Buddhist belief of the rebirths. There's this idea of the wheel of life. There are 6 realms. You could be reborn to one of them, and the house is definitely the one you don't want to go there. So you can see from the images here, there are the judgments going on, and the kings already sent the sentence to the people waiting there, and some of the people are already receiving their punishment. Even though the concept is Buddhism, but the way the painting represent, it's really based on the Chinese kind of bureaucratic practice. You can see the judge, the king of the house look like officials, and they have assistant. They're in this kind of a building, bureaucratic kind of building system. And then also the whole concept is also you are judged by the Confucian's moral conducts in order to determine where you'll be reborn. So this is the concept that health in Chinese is very, very popular. This is your basically illustrate one aspect of your possible afterlife. Yeah. So this painting is on display right now. So I encourage if you are in the area, really come to see. This is a very large, impressive painting. Yeah. This is from me.
Thank you, Chen. In Korea, we have a genre of Buddhist painting called Gamlo Tenghwa, which means painting of the king of sweet dew in English. The painting illustrates the like 3 realms of the Buddhist cosmology. On the top, this is the heavenly ideal world where Buddha is staying, and the middle ground illustrates Buddhist rituals of the people. And the foreground, at the bottom, illustrates the sins of hell. The painting wishes like their dead soul, family members or friends, to escape from the hell and to reach a nirvana. And Akiko, did you have an example?
So speaking of the death exhibition, there's a reproduction of a set of painting depicting the decaying human body. It's called Set of 10 Panels, Moral Illustration on the Transience of Life. This is not from our collection, but it is included in the death exhibition. And the depiction of the decaying body after death is showing that the human body returns to nature after the death, and also showing impermanence of life, and then don't cling to life. So it's the idea of Buddhism. Nothing is permanent. And then these paintings were used for the meditation tool for the monks. So if you are in the exhibition, please take a look at that.
Thank you. Dipali, do you have any example in your area? No? Okay. Let's get the questions from our audience. A simple question. Disappeared, sorry. Oh, is there any link between Chinese Buddhist vision of hell and Christian one?
I think that's something people immediately would think about because it's judgment and the punishment. But the Chinese hell, at least the 10 kings of hell, is based on a sutra called the Sutra of the 10 kings of hell. So it's not kind of related, but the concept is very similar. But I think one thing is different. I need to point out is like and even you ended after you receive your judgment, you ended in one of this hell. It's not eternal. You can be, once you finish your sentence and you receive all the punishment, you can be reborn again into different realms. So that's not eternal. I don't know if it's Christian, their imagination of hell is kind of eternal. Maybe my colleagues can help me out here, but that's something quite different.
Great, thank you. I think this is a question for Akiko. Very interesting, Nehanju. Could it possible to display in the gallery so we can view it just as those Japanese school kids?
Sure, yes, that's my hope. But as I mentioned, the condition of the painting is not ideal for the display at the moment. So I'm planning to have it repaired by professional conservators, external conservators. But again, this sheer size, it will be quite hard to find the place who can do it, and then also, it costs a lot. So, but then it's in my agenda to have it repaired and have it displayed in the gallery. Yes, thank you for asking.
And another question related to that, is the addition of animals as mourners unique to Japan?
No, it's not. And the image of this painting was introduced from China, as Wenchen mentioned. And I believe, Wenchen, correct me if I'm wrong, in Chinese paintings too, there are many animals too. But
Yes.
the later it became, the number of animals and even people, I think increased. So yeah, but then it's not unique to Japan.
Thank you. There's a question about the difference between sleeping Buddha versus nirvana. How they are different, how they are when they are represented?
I can maybe say a few words about that. I know for at least in the South Asian context, I mean, images that get called sleeping Buddha, sometimes they get called reclining Buddha. They are all representations of the Buddha's passing. Maybe people are using euphemistic terms, but the iconography got set very early on for images of the Buddha's passing or the death of the Buddha. It does go by sometimes different names, but they are basically the same thing.
Okay. Okay, I think we have to wrap up. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you to my colleagues Dipali, Wenchen, and Akiko for sharing some of the artworks in ROM's collection. Death, Life's Greatest Mystery exhibition is on view until April 7, 2024. If you have already seen the exhibition, thank you, and I hope you will visit again. If you have not yet had the chance to visit, we hope you will make time to do so this winter. Thank you for spending the hour with us. Have a good afternoon.